Well, I'm just getting over a little cold, so I'll try to project as well as I can. Actually, I'm serving on 8 company boards, 3 public companies and 5 private companies, and then I'm on our church board. And I guess what I'm constantly curious about is how teams work. And some years ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, someone handed me this book, and the book is back there, and it's by Patrick Lencioni, and it's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And much of what I'm going to talk about is my experiences shoved into this model that Patrick Lencioni uses. And the reason this book resonated so well with me is I saw myself, and I saw a lot of the dysfunctions of teams that I work with, just plain in this book. So that's what I'm going to try to talk about is, first of all, the dysfunctions, and then I'll try to give you some personal experiences. And some of the companies I work with are here, and we've gone through some of these things with different executive teams. Now, most of my work is with executive teams, typically the CEO and his or her staff. And but at times I've been called in to just teach, how to get teams working. So let me say a couple things about why I think this topic is so germane. The first thing is that as little kids, where did we learn to be good team members? And you start thinking, well, maybe it was from sports, but the trend in sports is to go to bigger schools where there's fewer participants on a big sports team. And those that do participate, those are lifelong memories. If you talk to somebody who played basketball at high school or college, those are lifelong memories for those people, because the feeling of being on a team and being a part of something kind of bigger than yourself is really powerful. But if you read Daniel Goleman's work, he says that we're becoming less and less emotionally intelligent, meaning our EQ, he calls it, is declining year over year. And he measures that with a test that he gives. And he says, well, part of it is, we're, as little kids, there's been a sea change in what it means to be a child. Most of you parents wouldn't send your kids off down to the neighbors or down to the park to play anymore. So kids are learning less and less, and they're doing activities, whether it's computer or video games or what, they're doing activities by themselves. And so what is happening is people come into business, and I'm going to talk about why business needs teams in just a second, but they come into business with less and less background on what it means to be a good team member. Right? Now all of a sudden you come to the business side of the equation and you say, okay, why do businesses need teams? And the answer is, well, complexity has gone up. We need interdisciplinary people. We need people, you start a project on anything, you need somebody from IT, somebody from finance, somebody from HR to make this thing work. So we've got an increasing need for teams, and we've got more and more people coming into this business environment less and less skilled at high emotional IQs or EQs, and they're less and less qualified to serve on teams. And what that causes is a tremendous amount of frustration, alienation. If you talk to, many of you probably on teams that haven't worked very well, and it's alienating. It leaves you empty. It leaves you really stuck, and yet it's not going to go away. The need in business for interdisciplinary teams is growing, not decreasing. Sarbanes-Oxley 404. Most of you know the Sarbanes-Oxley is the 404 side of that is the attestation by the auditors of the company's processes, and many companies, fairly large companies, will have a 100-person team to get ready for 404. So the need for teams is growing, 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 and the qualification of team members is less and less and less. So for me, when I read Patrick Lencioni's book, and I got to see him on a Sunset Presbyterian Church does a leadership conference every March, and he was one of the speakers there, and he was fantastic. So, and he spoke on this topic. So what I'm going to do is try to make sure I've done the background here. So my work, primarily, I come in with an executive team, and we start grinding away at some issue. And by the way, I want to say this, that Lencioni's work with dysfunctions, I think those are the big picture items, but I've also found that if you're looking for something as a team leader that would draw you through evaluating team meetings, closing a meeting, handling disruptions, you know, the nuts and bolts, this Learning Works document on team leadership is a fantastic document. Actually, Skip Santioli recommended this to me, and I've used it again and again and again for the nuts and bolts of trying to get people on a common vocabulary. Because one of the things that you're going to, you hear, you bring an interdisciplinary team together, first of all, the words have to mean the same things to everybody, and it takes some time. And there's a lot of theory about team formation and how long it takes for teams to gel and all that. But what I'm going to really be talking to you about is these dysfunctions. So if you think, Lencioni made a big triangle, and he put at the bottom of this triangle the absence of trust. The first issue that he would say is a dysfunction of the team is the absence of trust. Now you kind of say, duh, that makes, I mean, did it take a guy to write a book about the absence of trust? But what we're really talking about is not touchy-feely kind of trust, but the kind of trust where you say, people can be vulnerable in a meeting. You know, say, well, Gene, it's not my strength. Will you help me with this? You know, that kind of vulnerability. I'll tell you a story. It's way before I read Lencioni's book, but I struggled with this. When I was at Intel, by the way, I wasn't an executive vice president. I was the vice president. I just need to correct that. I ran the systems group, and the systems group was a group. At that time, Intel was organized into 3 groups, and the systems group had everything that didn't have little pins on it. You know, if it was a board, or if it was a system, or if it was a piece of software, it was handled in the systems group. So I had a number of business units, and Andy Bryant, who's the present CFO of Intel, was my controller. Okay? And at one of these business reviews in front of Andy Grove, Bryant and I had a disagreement. And, you know, about the way the financials were, or, you know, is that the way it is? And it really bothered me. I mean, this guy's on my team, right? So what happened is I ground on this for a few days, and finally I walked into Bryant's office, and he and I tell this story a little different, but it's about the same. But I walked into his office and I said, Andy, we're not going to disagree in front of Grove anymore. And he thought what I was telling him was, you're going to do it my way. And he said, Bill, you don't understand. That's my job here. I answer to the CFO, and my job is to keep you honest. I said, no, you don't understand. We're going to do it your way. If I can't convince you how to do it, we're going to do it your way. And do you know what? From then on, we were on the same team. He now owned my reputation in front of Grove. And it was a huge deal for him and a huge deal for me. And that's the kind of vulnerability that we're talking about. And usually the team leader has to demonstrate or get vulnerability started, because if you know, you're on an interdisciplinary team because somebody brings some set of skills and somebody brings another set of skills. So then you need to be able to be vulnerable enough to say, that's your strength, help me with that. I'll tell you another story, and I've said this when I was the executive VP at Synopsys. I would tell the sales force, I'd say, it's okay to win a big deal by yourself, it's not okay to lose one. You understand that message? That says if you can be the star all you like as long as the deal comes in. But if the deal is slipping or something else, I want you to bring all the resources of the company to bear, and I want you to step out of your own comfort zone and ask for help. So we've used that at Tripwire often, said it's okay to win a deal by yourself, it's not okay to lose one. Okay, now the second dysfunction, and these kind of lead to each other, is the fear of conflict. So we got at the bottom of this triangle, we've got trust. And the next one is fear of conflict. Now, I'm going to move to my church environment here for a second because when I was the chairman of the board of church, this is the one, I mean, I guess folks at our church viewed that, you know, we're Christian people, we shouldn't have passionate disagreements. I mean, you know, harmony. That's what we want here. And so I had to start every meeting by saying, listen, what we want is passionate positions on the issues, and I don't want you to attack any individual, but we want, I mean, we have you on this team because we want your views. And, you know, you'll find even in companies where people sit there, have a different point of view, and won't express it because they think maybe the team leader's not going to accept it or something else. And it's been shown again and again and again that you make better decisions when everybody can freely and passionately present their side. Now, I found two things that help, and I learned a couple of these things from Andy Grove at Intel. But one of the ways of trying to get people to focus on the issue is to say, well, one could make an argument. You're not saying, that's my position. You're just saying, one could make an argument, and then you make your best argument. And what I often do at companies, when we get this stuff out on the table, we're going back and forth, I say, okay, he's made his best argument, you counter that. Make your best case why he's full of baloney. And, you know, try to stay on the issues and protect the people's personalities, but go head to head on these issues, because if you don't, what happens is everybody goes underground. You ever been on a team in a meeting where, you know, some people call it the elephant on the table or the moose on the table? The big issue is not ever going to be talked about. And that's when people view team meetings as a waste of time. So, trust, fear of conflict. Now, fear of conflict, I want to be careful here. Many of you know the story of how Sequent Computer got started, right? Casey Powell was in a meeting at Intel, and one of the executives just ripped him up and down personally. Didn't stay on the issue, and Casey has said publicly and in things written, he said, I decided to leave Intel in the middle of that meeting. So the risk when you have active confrontation, the risk is that people who are prone to attack personalities will use this as a license to do what they like to do anyway, rip people apart, not take on the ideas. So as team leaders, I mean, what team leaders have to do is make sure that the attacks never are against the people. And that's why I say, you know, I'll often say, let's get these two ideas out on the table. Let's say you're defending one, you're defending one. Make your best cases, and we're going to decide. Because if you don't have that conflict, what happens is a decision is never decided. You go on and on and on. Or one of the problems we had at Synopsys for a while was we go into a meeting, we'd hear all the data, and somebody could go torpedo the decision by going to the CEO around the process. So if you can build an environment of trust and you can have constructive confrontation on the issues, you will be a long way to building a strong team. The third one, so we got trust down here, we got fear of conflict here, and the next one is lack of commitment. Now, why do people lack commitment? And that is they don't feel if they went underground with their points of view, okay, they haven't really committed to the solution. They haven't committed to the decision that's come out of there. And I think that my biggest, I was profoundly struck by this when I read a book called Founding Brothers about the American Revolution. Now, if you think about this for a second, these men and women of the American Revolution, on a pretty vague idea, committed themselves totally. I mean, they committed their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. I mean, they committed completely, irrevocably. In fact is, in this book on the Founding Brothers, Benjamin Rush, a doctor in Philadelphia who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, loved to tell this story. About the time they were getting ready to sign, there was a big, heavy-set guy there, and there's kind of a thin guy there. And one of them looked at the other and said, you know, I'm glad I'm not you, the skinny guy, because when they hang you, you're going to hang there for a while before you die. And the heavy guy was saying, when they hang me, I'm going to die right away. Now, we don't think about that very much, but these these men and women, and you remember for a number of years it didn't go well. They were going to be treasonous. I mean, there's no reason why England shouldn't have won this conflict if you look at it from a kind of a rational point of view. So they committed themselves totally, but they had what's also very clear in that book in Founding Brothers is that they had a forum to debate and get their ideas out, and that was what fomented the commitment. And I've seen this again and again with the companies that I'm working with. If you've got somebody who kind of has a point of view but can't express it, I mean, most people don't have to have their way. They just have to have a forum where they can get their point of view out on the table. But if they can't get their point of view out on the table, and then you say, why aren't we meeting these numbers? Why aren't we meeting what we said we're going to do? I said, yeah, I didn't really commit to it. That's not really my idea. So there's another thing that I think Intel's very good at. Intel has a term that people know. It's called disagree and commit. Some of you are Intel folks. Yeah, you know what disagree and commit means, right? That means you get your say, you're heard, the decision comes down, you disagree and commit. And in Grove's first book, High Output Management, he really articulated that well, that disagree and not commit is not an option, because you're just going to be torpedoing what the company's trying to do. Does that make sense? So we got trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment leads to the next dysfunction, which is avoidance of accountability. Now, why don't team members hold each other accountable? Well, sometimes they think it's the team leader's job to hold people on carbon. I've always wondered that about Rasheed Wallace when he would have one of his tantrums and kind of blow the game I just wonder why the other guys didn't come out there and say, Rasheed, What's wrong with you? But I see it happen all the time in teams that I'm working with, is people, you know, you say we take action items out of the middle of a team meeting. Boards, you know, we'll give suggestions, we'll take action items, and people won't follow through. Now, what's happening with Sarbanes-Oxley, boards are starting to do self-assessments, right? We just did one at Radisys. We assessed ourselves. And we did one at FEI. Public companies are now, best practices is to do a self-assessment of the board. But one of the things that's coming out of that is the board is holding itself and members accountable. Now, if you want to see the total breakdown of this, read the Senate report on Enron. Well, by the way, I want to say this. It's the role of the board of directors in Enron's collapse. And it's on, I found it on findlaw.com. What is interesting to me is these were not unqualified people on the board. Dr. Jedicke was taught finance at Stanford. He was a phenomenal guy. He was the head of the audit committee. And what was interesting to me is they just weren't holding themselves and each other accountable. I mean, do you know that, I mean, when you read, you probably read in the paper that Leah Fastow and Andy Fastow, that he was the guy who set up all these special little off-balance kinds of things. And Enron had in their policy that no employee could profit from setting up something for the company. I mean, that no employee could profit by transactions with a third party. And the board had to approve, when Andy Fastow became the head of these Raptors, the board had to approve this, that this was off, you know, that they had this policy, so they approved that Andy could be this guy and that he could make money for himself. So the whole board approved it. And if you think about this, I mean, I think we're not done yet, but when all this is said and done, probably these board members, who many of them are good people, you know, are going to lose their personal wealth because of the piercing of the corporate veil. I mean, they're not going to be protected by the business judgment rule. They're going to find that they're liable. So I think that we're in a world today where teams need to hold each other accountable. Now, I think that I see very often the teams that I work with, they expect the team leader to kind of do all the confronting, accountability. And by the way, this is not one of my strengths. In my career, you know, I like to be the good guy. I like to be liked. But I've just learned over time that it's important to hold the team accountable. And I often say to teams that I work with, I want your success more than I want you to like me. And usually that'll take the sting a bit out of somebody that you're confronting. Okay, the last one is inattention to results. Very top. Now, I mean, what would cause a team not to meet their results? I mean, I assume that they develop the goals. Some of you who, you know, have financial numbers or plans, what would cause a team to do that? And I think maybe a great example would be the Trailblazers. I mean, for a while, the Trailblazers would lose games, but Wallace and Bonzi Wells would be double-double. They would get enough playing time. And, you know, in some way they thought that was okay, but they lost the game. And the results have to be the most important thing to a team. I mean, That's why you formed one, right? And I think that I find again and again that it's not tangible to me why some companies or some groups make a profit and others don't. But it seems like once it gets into their DNA, it's there. And so I always really encourage people to go lean, make a profit so that they can kind of see what that feels like, and they'll want that feeling again. Now, many times, status and ego are the things that draw people back from results. And if any of you read Good to Great, that book, he talks about level 5 management, and he talks about that these are people that are just focused on results. And the other companies that he investigated, Jim Collins investigated, many of them weren't focused on results. He said, well, what was the CEO doing? What was he, that's how somebody got to be a CEO, is they were focused on results. But once they get there, well, they was doing status things, flying in the corporate jet, doing maybe going to political things are easy to get hooked by. I found every time when I was at Intel, I'd be asked often to serve on a company board or something, and I'd say, no, I can't do it because it's distracting. It took all I had to try to focus on the results of the systems group. So the bottom one is trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, no accountability, and inattention to results. And I want to be clear, to me, these are not the end all and the be all of teams, but they're very important things to look at the teams that you're on and say, well, is our team doing one of these? As I found on our church board, that if I didn't remind them every time that I wanted to have a passionate discussion, we would fall right back into not, I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. I don't want to be too pushy here. Okay, now I'm going to, I think, by the way, they have a few copies of these books back there. Patrick Lencioni wrote another book called The 5 Temptations of a CEO. They're basically the same issues, but he just applies them to a CEO. And what he does, he writes a little story. There'll be a little story here, and then in the back of the book is really the nuts and bolts about how to apply these things. So, what are they? Trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, results. Okay, questions? All teams working well. I don't believe it, but yeah.
I just want to comment that 75% of kindergarten is teaching these team.
That's a good point. She said that 75% of teaching kindergarten is teaching these team building skills. And by the way, if those of you who are still in school, you find that Stanford Business School or Wharton or Sloan, they're starting to have team projects, much more than they ever did before. Even in engineering school, they'll have a little team project, trying to get people to focus on teamwork because it's such a skill that is so demanded in the business world.
You were talking at the beginning about complexity.
Yes.
One of the big drivers for teamwork. I think the other big phenomenon now is globalization.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about working in global teams? So teams like U.S. working with Europe or Asia, those kind of things.
Well, okay, so there, in a global team, you're really crossing cultures, right? And that's not easy. And so the first thing I think you have to work on is we got to have a common vocabulary. And we got to know what that vocabulary means, right? And it's going to take, and team formation is going to take longer to get that established, because you're going to find, you know, if you're working with Japanese, you know, well, those of you who've been in Japan, if you hear the guy go, yeah, you know, some U.S. salespeople think that means the deal's done. Well, it's not, and yet, you know, certain places in Europe, you know, they're much more expressive, much more tell you how it is. So I think that my experience with international teams is you've got to stress and get to a common vocabulary. And then a common process, okay? We're going to review these, we're going to review the performance of our team, you know, periodically. And then you're going to struggle with getting through the cross-cultural things. And my experience is that you can do some fairly simple, this is not touchy-feely stuff, but when the team's together, you say, okay, David, tell us what your first job was. What was the most challenging about that first job? So start trying to build some, I'll call it a sense of community, if you will, because what that does is that reduces, that makes people open up and say, well, in our culture, you know, we don't do it like that. I had an experience in Japan when I was with Intel. Any of you know what a daruma is? Well, when you see Japanese politicians run for office, they often have this little paper mache symbol, and they color in one eye, and then when they win the election, they color in the other eye. And this is for things like having a baby, or getting married, or running in a political election. So, you know, dumb Westerner, I said, okay guys, here's the daruma. We're coloring in one eye, that's our plan, and when you make the plan, we'll color in the other eye. No, Dr. Lattin, that's not what daruma's for. And I said, you know, it's to achieve a goal, yes, but not the goal that you supposedly have control of. This is the goal that is up to higher powers. You know, this is, and man, it seemed right to me, but they were very shocked that I would try to get them to paint the other eye of the daruma when they made their forecast. So, bad. And by the way, there's lots of those. Working, I mean, when I was at Intel, we, you know, tried to set up a facility in India, and I wasn't clear that I wanted a specific set of business practices. Those of you that have worked in Russia, you clearly know that there's a set of business practices that are different from ours. And you have to be very clear what the words mean. This means we don't pay bribes, we don't do this, we don't do this, we don't do this, and we don't do that. Yes?
Are you ever in a position where you think, he's not a team member, he's not a team member, where you say, no, you won't going to change, you're out of here? Or do you find people actually changing?
Well, I'm not good at forecasting the human heart, but because sometimes I've thought, that person's not going to make it, and they really do respond. And other times when I think, well, that's not too bad a behavior, but you do have to come to a conclusion that the team, there's two things I should have said about this. At executive teams, most of those people have they have a team of their own who they've hired, they're invested in deeply. And you go to them and you say, now which is your primary team? And most of them think it's the team that they manage, right? It can't be that way. You've got to have because then what will happen is you'll say, well, my department delivered its results, but we didn't achieve our corporate collective results. So the allegiance has to be to the highest order team. And of course, if team dysfunction continues very long, you're going to have to remove people off the team. He does a very good job in this book. He tells a little story. It's a fictitious company, but you're kind of saying, well, I bet she's going to go, and you miss it. I mean, he does the same thing. He says, finally gets to a place where people have to go. And that's, Jim Collins did the same thing. You know, he talked about having the right people on the bus in the right seats. And for those that have you read that book. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the confrontation as you confront people in their, and hold them accountable. You're going to find that some people have to go.